Welcome to another edition of the Big News Roundup. I'm Bill Thomas, and here's what's happening right now. Our nation's top general issues a bleak warning about the dangers of war with Iran. Privacy advocates worry as police increasingly access Google search records as part of their investigations. A squatter living off food stamps cons people into thinking she's a big-time financial planner. And Governor Gavin Newsom permanently bans musician Kid Rock from California. All this and a bunch more is coming up right now on the Big Roundup. We have a great deal to get to today, and we begin with a dire warning from our nation's top military commander regarding the significant danger our troops could face. This is if President Trump ultimately decides to attack Iran. According to an alarming new report, the president's top military advisor, Joint Chiefs Chairman, a guy called General Dan Caine, has been reportedly cautioning both Trump and his security team that launching a military campaign against Iran has a considerable chance of resulting in a number of extremely harmful consequences for the U.S., for us right here at home, including the distinct possibility that our nation will be dragged into a lengthy and prolonged full-scale war. Furthermore, the report also says that the general is not in favor of a military strike at all because he's simply clear-eyed and realistic about what could eventually happen if Iran ultimately retaliates. Among his alleged fears that an extended conflict could result in significant damage to U.S. forces while simultaneously draining our country of valuable air defense munitions that are currently in limited supply, thus leaving us extremely vulnerable in a potential future war with China. We were always very concerned about Russia. Now all the concern is about China. Nevertheless, that report goes on to say that no matter how it all plays out, the Joint Chiefs Chairman will ultimately fall in line, act as a reluctant warrior, and willingly follow any orders the president gives should he ultimately decide to initiate a strike against the Islamic Republic. Now, for their part, security officials are pushing back against the report. They say that the chairman's job is merely to provide the president with a range of military options and inform him about any potential secondary dangers associated with those decisions, and that's pretty much what he's been doing. President Trump also chiming in as well and claiming that the report is 100% incorrect. He says in the end he'd rather reach a deal with Iran, but that if he ultimately gives the command to go to war, General Caine will gladly lead the charge, and furthermore that the Joint Chiefs Chairman believes the battle will be won and with great ease. For now, the clock hits ticking, and the entire region is waiting on pins and needles for what comes next. You should know that a number of our nation's top officials reportedly remain on the fence about attacking Iran, while another round of critical negotiations are scheduled to begin in just a matter of hours in Geneva. In the meantime, we've ordered all non-essential personnel to leave nearby Lebanon and our nation's military buildup in the Middle East. Check this out. It's now the largest that it's been in decades. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown, and here is the bottom line. For far too long and on numerous occasions, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, has been presented with a number of options with regard to what he needs to do, all in an effort to avoid a war with the U.S. To date, Iran has not negotiated, as you know, in good faith. And while right this minute, war is not exactly imminent, the clock, as we just mentioned a moment ago, it's ticking away, and Iran's future, it's looking rather bleak. Iran can still come to the table, engage in legitimate and meaningful discussions, be a team player on the global stage, stop threatening their regional neighbors and our friends right here out in the West. And in so doing, they could avoid what I think is the inevitable. Clearly, if we engage with Iran, perhaps our allies, including Israel, they'll be in our camp. But at the same time, China's making it very clear they're going to support Iran. Now, if we're at war with Iran, perhaps China will see a window of opportunity to move on Taiwan, and with nobody keeping an eye on Russia, perhaps Putin will make further advances on not only Ukraine, but in fact on more of Europe. For most of us here in the U.S., we all have several thousand cable, satellite, and streaming channels to watch on the big screen, on the telly, plenty to keep us occupied. So you might not think that any of this affects any of us. But think again now. If you read between the lines, look at the big picture, do some basic math. It's all beginning to sound like the entire world is dangling on the precipice of World War III. And if anyone were to survive that battle, the world, or what would be left of it, would, in my estimation, be entirely unrecognizable. In other words, full steam ahead with all those negotiations, and we've got to do all we can to work very diligently at keeping the peace. Switching things up entirely now and shifting our focus to a story dealing with law enforcement, privacy issues, and legitimate concerns for anyone who's ever done a search on the internet, including you and me. I've done a couple in my time. A troubling new report claims that stumped police investigators who are desperately trying to crack brutally complicated cases are now asking Google to tell them who searched for certain information online. And in doing so, they're threatening the privacy of millions of innocent people all over the country. According to reports, cops are now seeking a larger number of what are called reverse keyword warrants, which allow them to work backwards and locate internet addresses where searches were made for a variety of specific and potentially incriminating items. Instead of relying on more traditional warrants that allow them to target a specific person, this wide-sweeping dragnet provides investigators with data related to a wide range of people, both guilty and innocent alike. For their part, by using this technique, law enforcement has successfully been able to eventually track down a number of individuals who used Google searches on the way to committing their heinous crimes. They also say the information can ultimately provide them with a bunch of leads when they previously had nothing at all to go on. However, critics claim the Constitution's Fourth Amendment specifically protects them from these types of overly broad searches, which they say give police unfettered access to the thoughts, feelings, and concerns, secrets as well, of millions of innocent people. So far, by broadly accessing specific search data over a limited period of time, investigators have effectively used this reverse keyword method to track down a number of violent criminals who were charged with committing rape, arson, bombings, and a ton more. Regarding civil liberties groups say that by allowing law enforcement to pore over widespread data, authorities are basically turning every single search user into some type of suspect. And additionally, they point out that each person's Google search history contains a treasure trove of private thoughts, political beliefs, health concerns, and a whole lot more. In the meantime, a growing number of legal cases incorporating the use of these types of warrants now playing out in the court system nationwide, with one Pennsylvania Supreme Court judge ruling that any user who wants to keep their information private has options, which include not clicking on Google at all, which is pretty close to impossible every single day. And final thought, this is the News Roundup Lowdown. There's an old saying, if you haven't done anything wrong, you got nothing to worry about. On the other hand, and by now we all know this, your right to privacy, it's long gone. And if you think it still exists, you're kind of living in a fantasy world. As a means to an end when privacy is potentially compromised, to find a missing child or an arsonist, a murder suspect, perhaps it's okay to kind of play loose with the rules. But clearly, it feels like our privacy is being perpetually hijacked, and usually by those who are trying to make a buck off of folks like you and me. And right now, it feels like we're all nothing more every day than victims. Now, do a Google search on where to find the best price on a Ford pickup truck. Within a couple of seconds, all your social media pages inundated with ads for cars, trucks, SUVs, and more. Kind of feels like every keystroke, every search, every inquiry into pretty much everything is being very closely monitored. It's all terribly wretched, and honestly, it's almost impossible now to plan a casino heist or to take over an island nation because you know you're going to leave a digital paper trail, a digital footprint, which is brutally easy for those in law enforcement to track down. As bad as it appears to be today, perhaps in the future, our government won't have to bother with privacy concerns regarding online searches for investigative purposes. Maybe they can develop something called a pre-crime division where capers can be predicted before they ever even happen and then arrest the bad guys before they commit their dastardly deeds. In fact, it almost sounds like a pretty good idea for maybe a movie.
For Howard Marks, I'm placing you under arrest for the future murder of Sarah Marks and Donald Dumanos.
I just adore a good movie. Are turning now to a bewildering story concerning an alleged scammer in Maryland who illegally moved into a lavish $2.3 million mansion while posing as a highfalutin financial advisor, but who in actuality was nothing more than a low-level con artist actually living off of food stamps. According to reports, the 40-year-old squatter and her 16-year-old daughter recently moved into a luxurious 7,500-square-foot palace in an upscale neighborhood just outside of our nation's capital. Well, the problem, that home was in foreclosure at the time, and she didn't really own the place at all, or even in part. In the meantime, while the culprit sent her poor daughter off to work at a menial job at a nearby bakery in order to make ends meet, she hawked her financial services online, posing as a well-respected bankruptcy guru and posting flashy photos of her expensive Porsche, all to lure in unsuspecting customers. However, it wasn't long before her next-door neighbor, that guy over there, saw through her scam and became highly suspicious, ultimately leading to the revelation that the squatter was a total fraud, which I think is a fraud who eats a breakfast cereal called Total. It's not as good as Raisin Bran, but it ain't half bad. Records show that in reality, she's nothing more than a bankrupt grifter with a meager monthly income of less than $1,000, which is made up entirely of a pitiful amount of child support combined with just over $400 worth of food stamps. Since she first moved into the mansion, the scammer has been arrested a couple of times for her brazen scheme and has even spent a brief period of time behind bars after being convicted of breaking and entering and trespassing. Well, today, right now, she apparently is out on bond ahead of her next court hearing, which is scheduled to take place next month. I like that. Girlfriend has a rap sheet. Meanwhile, the bank that owns the property has apparently learned their lesson. They've changed the locks, and all of the glitzy home's doors and windows are now boarded up completely. Final thoughts, and this is the Big News Roundup Lowdown. Now, here's the way I see it. You can look at someone like this, and her name, by the way, is Ms. Good. You can look at something like this and use inflammatory language to call them out, embarrass them, and make them look evil and guilty. But maybe there's just a bit more to the story. Yeah, you can call this fine young lady a squatter, a shyster, and anything else. But if I became her court-appointed attorney, I might make this argument. I would perhaps indicate to His Honor that my client was merely doing research for a job she plans to audition for in the future as the next governor of Minnesota. Now, that particular position, as you might know, becomes available in just a matter of months, and I would argue that my client was merely doing what they call research or show prep, all as a means to an end to become a corrupt politician. I should have been embarrassed her. I'm pretty good at this. Regarding her living arrangement in the mansion in the posh neighborhood, I would also make clear to Judge Wapner that a pretend bankruptcy expert can't be seen living with common folk in average neighborhoods in one of those low-rent, cheesy two-bedroom apartments. In my mind, you got to do what you got to do to keep up appearances. And finally, with regard to that $408 she receives monthly for food stamps, well, last I checked, people with fancy sports cars who live rent-free in other people's mansions, they still have to buy victuals. And I, for one, would be devastated if this woman became somehow malnourished. There's also this, 408 clams as a drop in the bucket. And what about all those tattoos? They're not free, and the way I see it, that $408 ought to be doubled. After all, she might decide she needs to mar up her body with some of that more of that fancy ink. I just love it when taxpayer handouts are intelligently spent on things like extra tattoos. All right, circling back now to an alarming bit of news concerning China's effort to gum up the works and endanger American lives when it comes to our nation's possible upcoming military confrontation with Iran. Back off, China. A new report claims that right now the Chinese communist regime is closing in on a deal to sell a number of highly destructive supersonic anti-ship cruise missiles to Tehran, which would pose a significant threat to U.S. forces throughout the entire Middle East. According to experts, acquiring those missiles will greatly improve Iran's ability to defend itself and strike back at U.S. naval forces in the region because they have a range of just under 200 miles, and they're especially designed to evade ship-borne defense systems. Now, while details are a bit sketchy right now regarding the specifics of the deal, authorities say that negotiations between China and Iran regarding the weapons ramped up significantly following Tehran's recent war with Israel. They also warn that because they're so difficult to intercept, if the Islamic Republic gets their hands on them in the near future, it's going to be a complete game changer if we, in fact, end up going to war. Now, a couple of additional headlines we're also keeping a real close watch on here in the News Roundup newsroom. And first, industry leader Waymo now expanding the number of cities which are covered by their self-driving Robotaxis, fine-looking automobiles, greatly increasing their presence in both Texas and Florida. And among the new cities they'll now be servicing, Dallas, Houston, also San Antonio, Orlando as well. By the way, they're going to be joining the company's current offerings in the Bay Area, also Atlanta, and right here in L.A. I see them all the time at the home base. And I don't like those autonomous rides. It's like a ghost in the car next to you. Where's the pilot? All right, moving along, Today's Show host Savannah Guthrie says that her family is now offering a reward of up to $1 million for any information which leads to eventual recovery of her missing mom, Nancy, who mysteriously disappeared from her Arizona home. That happened several weeks ago. And as you know, that is a story we are keeping a keen eye on right here in the News Roundup newsroom. Also out west, Governor Gavin Newsom officially has banned musician Kid Rock, I don't know about the musician part, but Kid Rock, from entering California. In a tongue-in-cheek social media post, He says that the Rocker's recent shirtless workout video with RFK Jr. is downright creepy. It is downright creepy. I've seen that video. That the Golden State only allows winners, and that as governor of the free world, he's simply seen enough. I have as well. Yeah, I like that Governor Gavin fella, but I dislike the Rock Kid Rock, just a bit more. So just this once, and it's hard to say, I think I agree with Gavin Newsom. And now a quick gander at the world of showbiz, and we kick things off today with some exciting news concerning the next high-profile movie for Oscar-winning Hollywood legend Tom Hanks. The 69-year-old superstar now looking to add to his classic performances in Forrest Gump, Toy Story. He was great in Big, by the way, as well, and a bunch of other great films. Tossing on a stovepipe hat this time around, stepping into the coveted role of President Abraham Lincoln in a big-screen version of the best-selling novel Lincoln in the Bardo. Who among us doesn't enjoy a good movie? Now, we're all fans of that big-time Hollywood star Tom Hanks, and Tom has done virtually everything in his career. Always delivers. He's won a couple of Oscars, too, and I think he also starred in that great movie Top Gun. It's either Tom Hanks or Tom Selleck, whichever Tom doesn't have that big goofy mustache. By the way, if I got it wrong, please leave us a note here in the comments section. If necessary, I'll make any corrections. And turning now to a jaw-dropping announcement concerning a highly anticipated rematch between a pair of previously retired boxing legends who are planning to lace up their gloves and square off against each other one last time. Hey, believe it or not, undefeated champion Floyd Money Mayweather Jr. and his longtime rival Manny the Pac-Man Pacquiao are going to go toe-to-toe once again, with the fight scheduled to take place at the Sphere in Las Vegas. I've heard of Las Vegas. That's happening later this year. Now, if you recall last meeting of these two perfunctory pugilists on pay-per-view 10 or 11 years ago, you probably wanted your money back. It wasn't the Rumble in the Jungle. It wasn't Tyson and Holyfield. And honestly, I've seen superior battles in divorce courts. Pretty Boy Floyd versus Pac-Man Fever Take 2 coming your way in just 7 months. And this time around, the smart money is on the fella from the Philippines. And with that, time to call it a wrap on the Big News Roundup. Have an awesome day today. Stay safe. If you haven't done so already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button right there. Tell a couple of your friends to subscribe as well. And with that, we're going to dim the lights and fade to black. And we'll see you right back here next time for another episode of the Big News Roundup.